All right,
You
man.
need a Catholic school, man. I tell
That's
you.
why I got the cross above me, man, to keep me straight. And I got the old Spellman ring here, too, man.
Desmond
Oh,
said
Spellman.
Seattle. Yeah,
That's
you
right.
check.
Spellman's in the house, man.
By the way, you had your reunion yesterday, 1984.
No, come on, give me a break, man.
I'm just
1984, like the book. Oh, my
Yeah.
goodness. I never realized that for some reason. That I graduated. That's ominous.
Oh, wow.
Wow. That
So
says a
Des,
lot.
when
I
I
have to
go
say,
like
man.
this, you change it over. It's gonna
Wow,
be
that
wild.
says a lot.
But yeah.
Hey, do you guys have a ring as well, too, or not?
Yeah, I have one. I'm not kidding. A stripper took it in a club.
No, you're lying.
No, I'm not. And Elsie
Come on.
signed the back for me. Steve Gonzalez. Yeah.
You're lying.
All right, here we go, man. You ready?
Where did she lose it? I mean, what part of her body?
No, she didn't. I gave it to her. Whatever. Weird.
You gave it to her for a sec?
Oh,
for a lap dance. For a lap dance, I suppose,
Yeah,
right?
something like that to hold. I don't know.
See, look at that, man. That's a lesson. That's a lesson for life, man. You know,
Right.
you got to keep the pants on, man. You got to keep the chin up, right?
Yep.
Straight and narrow, man.
Let me bring my water here, and then we'll start in 10 seconds.
You're leaving me?
My mouth's dry already. All right.
He's nervous. He's nervous.
I'm not nervous. We do what.
You're like Dave Letterman, man, reaching for the water, man.
So here we go.
All right, what's up?
First,
all right, so first of all, we should introduce ourselves, man. Welcome to Winston. All right. Got the cousins, SG. Got the wait, are we anonymous or not anonymous? We never figured that one out.
We're not.
Semi-anonymous, man. We should keep a little bit of mystery.
Steve from New York City and Chris Perennial from Paris.
Yeah, it's more than that. My cousin from the Bronx, man. My brothers from the Bronx. You know, working the camera as well too. Got a whole film crew out there. Bronx, New York, baby. And the Boogie Down.
Our producer, Desmond Martinez and Florence Quisnell, two producers on both sides of the lake.
Across the Atlantic, man. I'm broadcasting from beautiful gay Paris. So there you go. Wow. Talk about lost in translation. What the hell am I doing here? I have no idea, but here I am. Right?
Yep.
The 21st century comes to the Bing. Here we go. All right. Now we're going to work on
that you're there and that I'm here.
Yep.
We were kind of both inspired on issues of the day, not just current administration, but for a long time it's been brewing. These passions we have, our love for freedom, democracy, and freedom of speech, which we both have currently. So hopefully we keep that going for a while.
Yep.
We've been talking about various things. You're a professor in Paris teaching the law. I'm not going to speak for you, but you introduced me to this young man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's not a young man. He's Thomas Sowell, who's a famous economist. You brought him to my attention, I believe, when you were in Cornell.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize I did that. Okay.
Yeah, mid-'80s. I was very, 13 years old, 14.
Yeah, well, our other cousin, Michael, man, I gave him a stack of material that dealt with both, from a left perspective and a right perspective and on a lot of these social issues. And I think that's when I first gave him, what was it? It was a book on racism. I forgot what the name of it was.
Yeah, probably Julius Wilson, him, and...
certainly William Julius Wilson. I mean, that's like the canon, right, for this type of stuff.
Probably
right?
Walter E. Williams as well.
Yeah, the truly disadvantaged and the declining significance of race, and was it Lawrence Mead and the New Politics of Poverty, and then I think as well Thomas Sowell's book as well too. And it's funny because when we in the hallowed halls of Cornell University, when we got our training, our first taste of some of these debates. I took I was well trained, shall we say, within the hallowed halls of the Africana Center at Cornell.
Right.
And then I came up from Ujima Residential College, which had a theme that was devoted to the development of the inner city and on questions of power politics and dealing with these type of issues, shall we just say? Okay. Very interesting. I mean, we could get into the history of why they developed these programs and how that came about and the expression of student angst and demand for change on college campuses around the country, much of which were sparked at Cornell University, I think in 1969, that gave rise to these wonderful institutions. But the funny thing is that over time, and shall we just say a little bit about myself a little bit, over time, I was very much swayed by all of this, coming from the Bronx, New York, and the inner city blight that we faced, and all these socioeconomic problems that we witnessed ourselves, a lot of which was terribly heart-wrenching and, shall we say, also dangerous in many ways too. We can talk about that at some point over the course of our podcast. But anyway, look, over time you grow in wisdom. I mean, that's the point of growing old, right? And yeah, and shall we say, some of us, maybe like myself, one of them, we went from the autobiography of Malcolm X and yeah.
I'm not laughing. It's
and Stokely Carmichael and Felipe Luciano, and we could just go through the list, right? That type of canon, and then we ended up at some point.
And in many ways, correct me if I'm wrong, Malcolm X believed in self-empowerment and
of course,
not relying on government or anyone to give you a check. Am I wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. So yeah, you can actually tease out, certain principles that actually are set forth, and certain arguments that are set forth by more conservative commentators like Thomas Sowell. Certainly, even from those who are considered the patron saints of the inner city, like Malcolm X. Right.
Shabazz.
Ah, yeah.
Carmichael went to Bronx Science, and I heard Farrakhan was born in the Bronx as well. Did you know that?
The Bronx is the training ground for leaders from the left and the right, from the art world, the literary world, all the way up to proper scholars. It's amazing. Even the bad boy of physics is actually up from Hunts Point. Leonard Susskind. Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting things now that the mic is on.
And many more.
Leonard
I'm a very proud Bronx guy like you are.
Right.
I'd just like to add,
Stanford physicist. Anyway, my point is that actually over time through experience, and considering these issues, let me just say, one can make, certainly in my case, one can make a pretty definite evolutionary movement from the left to the center to the right. Okay, I don't consider myself very right. Well, it depends. Certainly on religious issues, that could be a different story. But when one tries to wear a secular hat, I would consider myself a little bit right of center. There's some things where I still remain a little bit left of center. For example, I'm pretty hard against the idea of capital punishment, for example. Okay, and I could be pretty liberal when it comes to environmental issues. I'm happy about that stuff.
I mean, so are the conservatives in many ways. Maybe the perception has changed, but Teddy Roosevelt did create the national parks, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what conservative was, to conserve. Am I wrong or correct in that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. At Oxford, one of the primary questions that they have on the final exam for the degree in politics or in political philosophy is, what do conservatives conserve? I think it's kind of a difficult question, right? Because then it begs all these other questions, and this is a good segue into our topic.
Yeah.
It begs a question on whether anything is necessary or not when it comes to human nature, right? In fact, whether there is a nature, and the questions of moral certainty and whether there's any transcultural reality that's at work here. For example, when it comes to the question of inequality. So there you go, man. That's a perfect introduction.
I went through this book, Discrimination and Disparities. A new edition came out. So I YouTubed Thomas Sowell and heard him speak at the Hoover Institution. And I was able to pick out some points, first 20 pages or so. It's chock full of information. But what we're hearing currently from the left, the ultimate goal of the left, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I'm hearing in the States, is equal outcomes, equal results. All people, if let's say there's 20% of women in America, let's just throw that number out. There needs to be 20% of women that are brain surgeons, or 20% of women that are directors. And just a quote from Sowell in the book, he said, at one end of the spectrum of explanations offered is the belief that those who have been less fortunate in their outcomes are genetically less capable. That was the first half of the 20th century, the eugenics movement. And that has kind of been dispelled. And what we have is this current thought, I believe, at the end of the current spectrum is the belief that the less fortunate are victims of other people who are now more fortunate. So kind of as Marx said, the capitalist takes everything and leaves nothing for the worker. So if you're poor, it's a result because of a boss or something. But correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Marx ever saw that there would be this burgeoning middle class in America where people self-made, 90% of millionaires, 70% of billionaires have made it in one generation. I mean, you and I could attest to, maybe not you and I, but we have had family members that have had extreme upward mobility. And that is the case in many households in America.
Not us.
Not you and I, but, you know. But so Sowell talks about,
by choice.
About prerequisites. In his book,
which is the point,
Discrimination and Disparity, he talks about prerequisites. And he says, let's just say there are 5 prerequisites for success in a certain field. Okay? So there's prerequisites and probabilities. And one must have these prerequisites, let's say 5 of them, out of the 5 at any given time to be successful. So given multiple prerequisites, I'm reading here, in many human endeavors, we should not be surprised if...
What are you reading from the ceiling or something?
Well, I have something up here, just continue. But we shouldn't be surprised if economic or social advances are not evenly or randomly distributed among individuals, groups, institutions, or nations at any given time.
Yeah, okay.
So he goes into, and he discusses this, very beautiful.
But there's a couple of things we can say off the bat, okay? First of all, it seems to me that actually Thomas Sowell is talking about a particular context, and that would be actually the American experience, I would imagine, or the Western European experience, because it seems to me that actually if you talk about different contexts, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe the whole of Africa, in much of Latin America, in much of what we call the developing context, it's not as fair. It's not as fair a playing ground for people to compete as one would imagine it is in North America and in Western Europe, right? Yeah. So I mean, and that's a prerequisite for his argument. It seems to me that's a premise of his argument, right?
I believe so, because it's mostly centered on maybe America and Europe.
Yeah, because his point is that actually, even if you have, you tell me if I'm wrong, even if you have a fair playing field, okay, that even if we factor out, and we cannot deny, of course, historical discrimination, even if we factor out, if we possibly can, dimensions of historical discrimination and contemporary discrimination, that there still will be a difference in results. That's what we're trying to say, and people will not end up in the same place at the end, right?
Sure. And
that's also assuming that actually that there's room for everyone to end up in the same place in the end. They still will not, because of, I would imagine, the choices that they make.
Without question.
And because of their what's called their natural endowments, what they're naturally gifted with, what they're naturally born with.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, and once again, you could not be gifted. For example, Professor M. Terman, who did a study at Stanford University, from 1921 to 1986, they followed 1,400 people in California who had IQs above 140. 98% were white, 865 males, 672 females. And what they found was that the data on the careers of men in these groups showed various disparities. There was a subset of this group that had a least successful category. Let's say there was 150 males that were least successful. And he delved into, why are these males less successful than another group? They all have that one prerequisite, right? The high IQ. But they were lacking in other prerequisites. Meaning those that he followed for about 35 years or 40 years, those that were more successful had parents that were more educated, that had, let's say, 30% had a college degree, the parents.
Yeah.
Those that were unsuccessful, their parents, a good number of them didn't graduate 8th grade. And those that were successful, parents had a culture of education. They had books in the house, magazines. There was a push for education. And very interesting to note.
I can hear the army of the unemployed, particularly among the left, screaming whenever we mention the word culture. I mean, it's like the most deadly argument of all, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a big cup of water you got there, by the way. Let me see.
I know. I'm a big guy.
Oh my goodness.
Well, also, this is very interesting.
Do you mind if I reach for some scotch in a moment? Because I was thinking about doing this, man.
No, two of the men.
It's not politically correct.
Did not reach a 140 IQ. Actually won Nobel Prizes in physics. So these were men who didn't have the prerequisite of 140 IQ, but obviously they had other prerequisites that garnered them a Nobel Prize in physics.
Yeah, that's what we call, I mean, just to get popular here, the X factor, right? What Catholics would call charisma, right? I mean, it's unquantifiable.
Hard work.
There you go. There's no, I mean, we could get actually theological here, and it has to do with actually the gift of actually being able to choose one's own way. The gift. I mean, we're supposed to be created in the likeness and in the image of God, and one of which is that we have a certain capacity that we have a certain degree of freedom in order to place that whatever gifts, whatever capacities have been given us, okay, by dint of birth. Right, or by dint of circumstance, and that's a gift as well too. Circumstance is a gift, or it could be a curse. Right. An interesting thing. Actually, I used to follow like the so-called super geniuses, the ones that actually just like destroy the IQ scale. Maybe close to 200, if that's possible, even above 200. One of which is someone, ironically, I think her name was Savant. Can you believe that would be her name?
Nice name.
Okay. Yeah, and she's from New York. And you would expect that she would be racking up Nobel Prizes left, right, and center. And I think she ended up doing like puzzles, like crossword puzzles, and organizing them because there are other things involved. One of which is drive, and one of which is choice, and the ability to overcome challenges, and
a multitude of things.
Just like when it comes to the question of global warming, dare I say, to mix arguments, and climate change, that there are an infinite number of variables that probably play in success from non-success. But the problem with these arguments is that we're dealing with a particular context, and we're dealing with certain premises of that context. We have to say that this is only relevant, let's say, to keep it simple, to the American experience, based on the that is that people are able to realize the benefits of their own choice and their hard work. Right?
Yeah, I mean, Sowell even speaks about Japan in the early 19th century, the so-called backward nation. And we had a general who went to Japan and presented them with a train, showed them a locomotive. And this really inspired the Japanese to become industrialized and I guess focus on science and adapt traditions of math from the West and scientific theory and
but my point is just to negate the arguments of the left, or actually to give credence to the arguments of the left, that if we're going with culture and by way of choice, there has to be an opportunity for that culture or that choice to realize
something to
realize its benefits.
Spring up. I mean,
like, for example, I'm just imagining the poorest of the poor, the truly disadvantaged, shall we say, right? The least advantaged person, in the words of John Rawls, okay? In a context like, say, Zimbabwe or something like that. What choice matters in that particular case? What matters industriousness at that point? What matters whether you have the right social network and structure in villages? And maybe it might matter a little bit here and there, but it's quite rare, exceedingly rare, I would imagine, to overcome the burden of a society that so crushes you in so many ways.
Oh, without
That's what I'm saying. So my point is, and this is actually playing to Hayek's idea, even George Soros, I hate to say that, but the idea of an open society. You have to have a society that's free enough and open enough that allows people to realize the benefit of their choices and actually to learn from the detriment of their choices too. There should be certain benefits and costs of making the right choices
on the wall
and wrong choices. Yeah.
Oh, where it was. That's where it was.
Oh, I thought you're by yourself. Oh,
yeah. No.
Yeah.
I concur.
You see my point?
I have someone, I won't mention their name, but they're raising money for schools in a place where there's no opportunity and no jobs. Okay, schooling's fantastic, but then what after school? Like, is there going to be a job at Google for you? Or, not trying to...
All right, so to play devil's advocate, even within the United States, what happens, this is what they would argue all the time, what happens when you have a situation where someone tries to overcome their circumstance, like, for example, in our situation, okay, within, the boogie down Bronx, okay, let's say the South Bronx,
I don't see that like
okay,
I see,
well, let me say, circa 1978, 1982, I mean, these are rough times, when they were riddled with crack and gang violence, and guns were more plentiful than maybe, works of Shakespeare, for goodness sake. Okay, you have to understand that your choices are seriously compromised in those particular cases.
Oh, and your choices matter much more than someone who has opportunity and who's familiar with the police or could get you out of trouble, of course. So every move you make is magnified. You have to tread,
Yeah, and then this plays into the left's argument that certain endowments, which seem unfair, benefit certain people more than others. So certain people who are a little bit more well-off will do better in those circumstances. Those who maybe have a little lighter skin will do better in those circumstances. And those who have, maybe born with a higher IQ, whatever IQ is, certain, intellectual gifts, whatever that might be.
Well, once again,
more than analytic, that would make a difference in those particular cases, right?
Yeah, of course. Well, once again, the push, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems Rawls wants this perfect society where everyone has
no.
Okay.
You said Rawls?
Let me just say one thing. An almost equivalent chance of success. Okay, where we could all start from this race at the same point, and we could all end up in the same place. I mean, there's always...
No. That you said Rawls? Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. No,
absolutely. No. We'll talk about Rawls later.
Okay, but look,
but it's a fair thing because actually those who critique him from the right say he's a radical egalitarian, and those who critique him from the left would call him a radical inegalitarian. So
I understand.
It depends.
But
we'll talk later about Rawls.
Fair. And unfortunately,
fairness, that's different. Yeah,
unfortunately, life has never been fair. And there's never been equal results within cultures. For example, we go into, Sowell will go into China. He talks about China, how it was the dominant country during the Middle Ages. China was so dominant, it had ships that could go to the New World. You know why it did not go to the New World? Almost like Rome, the arrogance was, hey, we have nothing to learn from anyone else. So why go in there? Europe's in the Dark Ages. We have nothing to learn from Europe. Unfortunately, they made a bad decision. Their prerequisite that they used was bad judgment by their government because Europe was coming out of the Dark Ages. And there was an exchange of culture, of knowledge, of science that was going to occur in the world, and China was blocked out from that. What were the consequences of that? We saw China become very poor, and a very poor civilization that eventually was taken over by various countries. Japan in World War II. We could bring up the Portuguese in Macau and the British in Hong Kong. So all these prerequisites and possibilities, they could change from time to time. Nothing remains constant. And you could have a couple changes that you make that could destroy a nation or elevate a nation. The same could be said with, I believe he goes into Scotland. How Scotland in the 1800s was considered a backwater. It created nothing. They had their own language, a Gaelic language.
Yeah.
Protestants came in and said, you need to learn English. You need to be able to read the Bible. They learned English, and Scotland, as a result, became a powerhouse from the 1850s onward.
Yeah.
It produced Adam Smith, right?
Yeah, but I think you're confusing things by talking fairness as opposed to a standpoint of equality throughout history. That's a different argument.
Oh, no. I'm just telling you that there's never been equality among history.
Oh, yeah.
Wealth is a new term.
Yeah.
The world, the last 50 years, has probably has increased in wealth exponentially. I'll give you an example of China. 40 years ago, 99% of the Chinese were poor.
Yeah.
That number has gotten down to, this varies, maybe 20%.
Yeah, but you realize that we're talking about qualitatively different things here because...
Yes.
I'm just saying if you use the word fair, it just enters into a different type of thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, wait, let me just say, because equality is a descriptive term, fairness is a normative term. That's my whole point.
Of course.
Okay, it's a moral question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the question is that actually... This is what, if we want to put John Rawls into this and some of the latter justice theorists, which would be very interesting, then we have to ask ourselves whether, notwithstanding, okay, the fact that actually people begin from different places and end up in different places, whether that's fair or not, okay? And if it's not fair, whether there's any things we can do to make them more fair. That's the question.
Sure.
Think about that.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of safeguards to make things more fair. We're talking in American terms. There are programs to help people to get them to a certain level of work and education. But once again, Sowell says, I'm sticking to the book, and I'm not having an argument here, but I'm sticking to the book. He even goes into, he says, why do firstborns make more money than second, third, and fourthborns? These are
that's very interesting. Yes. If I could just stop you there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is he arguing a natural argument there about inequality, or is he talking a cultural, behavioral type argument about inequality? I mean, that's what I got a little bit confused about with Sowell.
I think what he's basically saying, and he just gave scant evidence on this, says the firstborn usually gets much more attention than the second and third. As you know, in America, we call it helicopter parents. They have that firstborn. They're worried about every move the kid makes.
Got it.
They're in the child's life. They're on the child all the time. They're involved in everything. As the second, third, and fourth go, I'm a third child, as you know. My parents were much more lenient to me.
Means a lot, man.
Yeah, and I can remember my brother Greg saying,
I'm a firstborn, by the way.
You're allowed to do that? Like he's a firstborn, and he'd say, you're allowed to go out? Wow, funny. She bought you that? Or really? I had much more leeway because I think the parents wise up to, hey,
continue.
This is not Armageddon.
I'm going to get some whiskey, man. Continue.
Yeah, I think they believe this is not Armageddon, and that there are ways around this and you're going to be fine. So,
I got you, man. Wow, man.
Yeah. And Sowell even goes into empirical, he goes into, let's say, sports. And he talks about anyone who's a professional golfer has met prerequisites to become a professional golfer. The numbers of being a professional golfer, maybe a quarter of a percent.
Yeah.
Okay. He says, explain to me why
I'm trying to tease out natural arguments from unnatural arguments. I think it gets a little bit confusing here. The golf situation seems to be that some people are gifted in ways that other people are not gifted.
Well, once again, all these golfers who are pros are gifted to be pros. We could all agree with that.
Got it.
But what makes Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, and Arnold Palmer? What takes them to the other level where they won 200 tournaments, where you have great golfers who've won 0?
Man, have you ever seen the? Is it Paul Hogan? Have you ever seen the swing of Paul Hogan?
I think I have. Yeah.
Oh my goodness! See, that's a good example. Okay, I hope I got the name right. Oh yeah, Hogan. I'm not a big golf fan.
Ben Hogan.
Okay, Paul Hogan is what? He was wrestling Gators.
Hogan, the wrestler, maybe.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't know.
Hogan. Okay, but anyway, yeah. But I saw a swing. Oh my goodness, it's like the swing by DiMaggio, right, against the
Right.
Washington Senators.
What
Man,
made DiMaggio better than the other guy?
That's my whole point. Part of it could be drive. Part of it could be the right social circumstances to allow that drive to actually come to fruition.
God, gift, and
right?
talent too.
And the other thing is the natural argument about God, gift, and talent.
Right.
And it just brings us back to square one about the question of inequality. The question is because it's I don't know if you meant it that way, but it's good to bring up the question, not just the description of inequality, but whether it's just or not. And the only way to really determine whether it's just or not is the question of fairness, to bring up John Rawls.
Right. I think Sowell makes an argument that it is just, that it's occurred from recorded history, and it happens every day. It even happens in nature.
Okay, fine.
Which is very odd. May I say one thing? He says it even happens in nature, where 90% of the world's tornadoes occur in America.
Got it.
Why?
But that doesn't make much of a difference in terms of argument, because human beings are, in a sense, part of nature and above nature.
Right.
We have something that's special. We could get theological about it, or we could be secular about it. Okay, but one cannot deny that we're a special type of animal. Okay,
sure.
We're the top of some great pyramid of being. Right.
Right.
And of course, from a Judeo-Christian Islamic point of view, we're also below the heavenly realm. Okay, that's fine. Okay, but the idea is that actually we can, no matter how much of a skeptic you are, you cannot deny one wonderful thing, like what Richard Rorty said. Richard Rorty was trying to say, following Nietzsche, that if there's anything that's common about this animal, the human animal, it's that we're a particularly rapacious type of animal. Okay, we murder at pleasure and so on and so forth. Okay, but then at the same time, from the other side of his face, kind of like undercutting his argument, he then suggests that there's another quality of us, and that other quality of us is that we can adapt to our circumstances, and we're malleable. But that makes all the difference in the world. And that's something that we can do certainly more effectively than any other animal in nature. So the point is, should we respect nature or not respect nature, or should we overcome it? Now, when it comes to the question of inequality, even if actually one could argue that it's perfectly natural for people to be unequal, even it's actually perfectly natural, and it's just a perfectly purely descriptive situation that certain people are born with certain talents that other people are not, or that we're all born with different type of talents. Again, it depends on what those talents are and how we use those talents. Some people are better with their hands, some people are better with their feet, some people are better in analytical reasoning, some people are better in creativity, artistic creativity, linguistic creativity, and
or you could develop
is diverse, or certain aspects of athleticism.
Sure.
Some people are particularly brave and strong, and so they make perfect soldiers, or some are good leadership and make perfect.
Well, you're saying but you could also.
The point is, so what when it comes to the question of justice?
But you could also mold yourself into someone and become better. You're not born an academic, but you could work hard and become a professor.
I think
you have to have a certain degree of intelligence for that.
Well, we're kind of contradicting ourselves then, because I thought we were saying that actually, if people are born with a certain nature, they should respect that nature.
No, I'm not just saying that. I'm just saying I'm not saying it. Sowell's saying in nature or in society, there are different outcomes. People buy into different decisions. They make different decisions that inspire them. For example, he brings up Jews. He said, how come the Jews never produced a car? They never got into making cars. That was their culture, wasn't into making cars, I guess. They got into the fashion industry, right? Maybe into the law industry, into real estate. But who are the people that started the car companies? Henry Ford. He was Irish. The Dodge brothers, Northern Europeans. Different.
I noticed. I think I mentioned to you. I noticed a lot of Irish men, for some reason, gravitate to the CIA, particularly the highest levels.
Yeah, and FBI. There you go. Historically, why were most cops Irish?
So I think the deep state, I think for some reason the Irish have been gravitating to the deep state, and I don't know why. It's a very interesting question.
Well, it seems that way, what we have, right? When McCabe, I don't know what Strzok is, but Comey and...
No, but it's true. I'm not lying to you.
But it is true.
Directors of the CIA, and I would imagine for the NSA as well, too.
You just brought up a very valid point that I always knew. Even in the cartoons, we could, Bugs Bunny, they had an Irish police officer because they gravitated to that field.
Yeah.
What is it?
Tend to be Irish
Catholics at home
too. Ironically, a lot of them are proud graduates of like Georgetown, so they're like Irish Catholics.
We spoke about that it seems as though Georgetown and Yale have a feeder. They have like a feeder school from undergrad to grad, and then CIA. Then it seems as though deep state. It's funny you bring that up. Look at this slide.
Yeah, there's a nice long corridor from New Haven to...
Look at this. It might seem strange that during the 19th century, era of mass immigration from Europe to the U.S., it was not uncommon to find Jewish and Italian neighborhoods in New York represented by Irish politicians.
Yeah,
a situation that did not change.
Tammany Hall,
exactly, until well into the 20th century.
The Daily Machine in Chicago, sure, yeah.
So different cultures and groups pick different businesses to get into.
Yeah, what about we Ricans? Well, what do we do in the end, man?
I think we're very involved in politics as well. I mean,
the funny thing is, all jokes aside, quite honestly, I just had a discussion with my French wife over here, okay? Puerto Ricans, I know it sounds ridiculous, are about the most accomplished people on the planet per capita, okay? For goodness sake, if you
are very high,
sports, for example, I mean, if you think about how much we've dominated per capita, by far, from any nation in the world, from the United States to Mexico to the United Kingdom in boxing.
If you look into
music, boxing, let me just say acting, music, from Broadway to Hollywood, for goodness sake.
Oh, let me just add,
for example. And what about actually Miss Universe and a lot of the international?
Let me add to that.
Beauty pageant.
As far as acting goes, the first 3 Latins to win Academy Awards were all Puerto Rican. So I think there might have been 5. 4 of them are Puerto Rican. You talk about boxing, we probably have over 50 champs, which is the most per capita by far.
Camacho. I have a couple of Camacho stories we could talk about.
Mexico might have, let's say, 200 champions, but they have 300 million people or so. So we're right there. Even to the extent that I saw a boxing match, and Max Kellerman said, this is ridiculous, and he was complimenting that Puerto Ricans compete with Mexicans when the numbers are so skewed.
Yeah, I know, right?
Against them. He said, this is he said they're the best fighters in the world. That's
nice. Oh, man. Well, you walk in the same footsteps as Kellerman, so give him...
And if you look into music...
for me, man.
You look into music.
It's funny because actually Puerto Rican music dominates so much. I'm here in Europe. And
freestyle, reggaeton, salsa.
Yeah. We're not even talking about hip-hop as well, too. I mean, we contributed pretty much to hip-hop, too, man, and the boogie down. Man.
Dude, all the DJs, many of the DJs that we grew up with in the club scene that are still killing it out there.
Vega, right?
Even artists.
Jelly Bean Benitez, right? Oh, man.
Jelly Bean, I mean, a lot of them. Right. Too many to
What about graffiti artists? Do they count for anything?
Of course. They're showing their works all over the world.
I have a mixed blessings about that, man. Oh, yeah, when it's on but it doesn't make sense. When it's on a canvas, it doesn't really, it loses its edge. But when you see it on a train, and every corner of it is hot, what was it, Hot 105 or something, whatever it's called, man?
Well, once again, you could have 2 feelings about something.
Yeah.
When I saw graffiti, I use your term. I thought it was Armageddon. I thought it was wrong. It was private property. I thought it was the first step to Armageddon. But some of the art is really beautiful, number one. Number 2, you have to understand the whole culture. These kids were stealing paint, like it or not. I'm not for that, of course. I'm a goody two-shoes. But they were stealing paint. They had no blueprint to copy. I don't think they knew about Picasso and Dali.
They had to steal
They wanted to get their name out there. They contended with the gangs.
Couldn't they just buy the paint, for goodness sake?
Hold on. They contended with the police and the gangs, and they were able to push through and push this whole inner city culture which we might have different views on, that became the most dominant culture in the world.
Oh, easily, by far.
Graffiti, breakdancing.
By far.
Yeah.
Oh, just to burn you up a little bit, in Europe, it's like the hottest dance in Europe is salsa. But of course, it's not Puerto Rican salsa. They call it Cuban salsa. So we can have a separate argument on whether that makes any sense or not.
Most of the modern salsa was elevated by Puerto Ricans in the 70s. Fania All-Star. They're the ones that spread that music all over the world.
Yeah, but to be fair, it did come from mambo roots in large measure. So I guess that's where the confusion comes from.
Oh, sure.
A lot of them settled in New Jersey and in New York.
Jersey, it's New York. It's
New Jersey as well too. I think actually they had a nice
Cuban, New York.
Cuban population. You sure about that? Cuban population?
No, I thought you said the music.
No,
a lot of Cubans were on the Upper West Side in the 50s. And
I think a lot of them came from Jersey, but
there's Union City there.
We'll fact check that. But I think that's what it was. I think actually because he lives in the salsa, it does, and the dance as well. It is a little bit similar to Cuban mambo and other.
Well, everything came from something. I mean, to the point, Fania All Stars have a song that celebrates Africa.
Yeah, and Celia Cruz, of course.
It came from Africa. Sure, it's a meld of all these cultures. But what we know, what took salsa to a prominent level? I don't know. I'm a handsy guy.
No. It makes me funny. No, it just drives me crazy. Everyone, for some reason, when they want to emphasize it, but this means not to take the literal word when you go like this on salsa. You went like this, salsa.
Yeah. Well, look at this quote by Sowell. He says, I don't know if you saw this one. Jews have been well represented in retail, finance, and garment production, but by no means equally well represented by heavy steel industries, such as production of steel of automobiles.
Yeah.
Then he goes into saying statistical underrepresentation or overrepresentation of various groups is not peculiar to the U.S. or to our times. For centuries, there have been countries where most members of various professions and most business owners in whole industries have been members of a subordinate minority. He brings up a point which is very interesting. He said numbers from 1994 will tell you, 1994, a long time ago, there were 58 million Chinese who were all over the world in various countries. Yeah. And he said their gross GDP was higher than the 1 billion in China. So they brought something with them. They have a culture of hard work and being industrious. Therefore, the 58 million transplants had more money than the 1 billion people in China. Of course, there's various reasons, communism, suppression of different things. But it's very interesting when you know.
So let me just be a little bit argumentative here. Okay, so I think his main point in all of this is to argue that the left's argument about discrimination keeping people down, and producing this inequality, driving this inequality, is overplayed. I would imagine he's not saying that there's no discrimination. He's certainly not arguing, I would imagine, coming up from Harlem. He came up from Harlem during the 1950s, I think, right?
Yes.
40s, 50s?
Yes,
right.
Yes.
I mean, he cannot possibly argue, like our family, we both came from Harlem as well, originally before we went to the Bronx, okay? You can't argue that discrimination doesn't play into some difference between the end results of certain people, okay? And that discrimination was disproportionate for some people over other people. Okay, we can't argue against that, I would imagine.
No, I think he would say...
I think he's probably saying that it's probably overplayed and that there are other things that account for the end, the differences that we see at the end of the spectrum, well, the end of the process, okay? Yeah. The end of an individual or collective life, right? And that is the choices people make, their tenaciousness, whatever we might want to call it, their charisma, that X factor that allows them to overcome.
Get back to the word prerequisites. You have to have certain prerequisites.
To be reasonable in their choices, maybe to make the right choices. I find it very interesting, on the side, how people could get PhDs and can be perfectly, analytic in one way. They could have all the what seems to be all the hallmarks of genius in a certain way, right? They can read, Hamlet, for example, in half a night, stuff like that, and understand it perfectly well. Stuff like that, okay?
Yeah.
They they could do their quadratic equations, backwards and forwards and stuff like that. And calculus is not a big deal to them, that type of thing. Okay.
Sure.
Right. Numbers theory, whatever. But at the same time, when you ask them, to talk about certain basic questions that even involve, like, for example, a scientific understanding, like, for example, climate change, okay, or climate, global warming, or for example, the LGBT plus community and some of their premises, and it seems like all that analytic quality just goes out the door. So actually, even IQ doesn't factor as much as one thinks in terms of, and it's not a guarantee that actually people are going to end up. Well, I'm just saying that goes back to the question of, it's not only IQ, not only analytic reason, but it's also making, wherever that comes from, inspiration, revelation, making the right choices, make the right choices, being reasonable, being good parents, being the product of good parents, being the product of good families, and so on and so forth. Go ahead, man.
And you have to have drive and goals. As we go back to the beginning of the presentation,
yeah,
two of the participants who didn't have an IQ of 140 won Nobel Peace Prizes.
The funny thing is,
they didn't have weight. They didn't have one of the prerequisites, but they had many other prerequisites that would get them to a certain level of winning a Nobel Peace Prize.
I think the person with the highest IQ ever recorded was the savant. Was it Marie Savant?
The person I'm kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another person from Korea, and he was a child prodigy, and I think he got his PhD from Cal State at the age of like 12 or something like that. Right. We're going to have to fact check all this stuff, okay?
Right.
And yeah, he argues that IQ is not enough. He's the first one.
Of course, we know that. Sure.
Yeah, and he's like, a professor in some university in Korea, but it's certainly not the meteoric rise that people expected of him in the mathematics department of Caltech and MIT. It's not something like that. And
once again,
Nobel Prize.
The point I'm making is, we know the American story historically has been, people did not come to America who were rich in Rome. They were rich in Rome and Paris, and they said, let me move to America. It's an immigrant story of those who wanted a better life. So the American story is a story of those who came without education, without property, without money, and were able to progress. And we must thank the founders of this country for creating an environment like that, where your property was respected, where you could gain an education, and where from one generation to the next, if we're talking in financial and education terms, the mobility is astonishing. Unlike any other country. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's no denying that, but we also have to admit that that those opportunities grew over time. That we became a more perfect nation over the struggle. But you have to give credit where credit is due. From the critique and the struggles of the labor movement, of those who have a pang for justice and injustice, those who actually did make the march from Selma to Montgomery, those who did confront the state on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, stuff like that. Those who put their necks out, okay, those who were in the freedom marches, over the years, and that type of thing. Okay. Oh yeah, that's fine. Okay, but we can't deny that. We cannot deny that. I never would deny that. But what I will deny is not deny, but if you look at, and I can't point out particular groups, but those that haven't achieved, let's say, if you live in New York, there's opportunity here. There's opportunity for an education, upward mobility, work. Those that haven't achieved, the onus has to be on them, most of it, even though they might not have all the prerequisites. What I am saying is, you don't have to be a superstar to live a decent life in America. You could be a fireman, which is great. Not putting that down. A butcher, a mailman, even a laborer, and live a decent life. I believe Ben Shapiro has the numbers. Forgot where he got it from. But if you want to stay out of poverty, you have a 98% way of staying out of poverty. You get a job, you get a high school diploma, and you get married. You don't have kids out of wedlock, of course. You don't do drugs. You have a 98% chance of getting out of poverty. What I will tell you also is, this is a very forgiving country. we're acting as though everyone has to have an education like you to be successful. No, there are people without college degrees who are very wealthy, who are very intelligent, who have fantastic lives. And it's not all about money. There are the starving artists who get to buy in or buy out of the system. They don't
they usually laugh at people like us, right? You went to college, huh?
No, totally different choices, you know. Anyway, I mean, everyone has different choices and different focus on
but just to actually bring this back home, if I can.
Yeah.
So if someone is born poor and black, and let's say out of a sharecropper family,
sure.
40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, okay, you would not say that was that's not a fair opportunity for them to actually work themselves out of that situation. You would agree with that one, right?
Oh yeah, they had less opportunity.
Okay, and compared to, for example, to say a poor black person born within, a situation, a high crime, urban blight, a situation of urban blight in Baltimore. Okay, are you saying then that actually that person now born in that situation today has more of a chance to actually overcome their circumstance than they did in the past, or not?
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely much more opportunity now with the internet.
Okay, so the onus is just a wee bit, maybe substantially, I don't know what you want to say here, more on that individual and the choices that they make, okay, to overcome the situation now than it was in the past.
Oh yeah, the choices definitely matter, and those are the most important things that someone could do. Their human capital and what they have inside and the decisions they make are going to be the barometer of their future, positive or negative. Now, once again...
But you're still not denying that actually the person who's poor now, let's say poor, black, in a terrible situation of urban blight, okay, is in a terribly difficult circumstance. And it's not, we're not saying it's particularly easy for them to work out of that situation. Are we saying it's easy, or we're admitting how difficult that is?
No, of course it's much more difficult than if I grew up in Sag Harbor and my father's an attorney and my mother's a judge.
Whether white or black, it doesn't matter what the ethnicity is.
No, but I'm just saying there's been America's history has had numerous stories of people who have gotten out of that situation and have risen to the apex of society. So it can happen. Now, we'd be idiotic to assume that it doesn't take much more work and much more discipline and much more, as we said, they have to walk that straight line.
Yeah.
But there is opportunity. I mean, in many ways, people will think you grew up that way, Chris. Even though you had a mother and father, they would say you grew up that way. You went to Harvard Law School. I mean, in my little cluster of townhouses, I've had people who grew up, we considered inner city, I guess.
Yep.
Maybe better than crime-ridden, a couple steps up. But in my little cluster in townhouses, we're going education-wise. Someone went to Brown, someone went to Michigan, someone went to, hotel school, did very well. Cousin went to Cornell, cousin Mike got 3 degrees. Guy across from me went to Florida State and on a basketball scholarship. I mean, on and on and on. NYU, Greg, me, NYU, other people. Paul Mack, shouldn't name his name. You got to cross it out, but did well. Educated, went to great school. So the opportunity's there. I mean, the opportunity's there. So, but let me just get to one more thing. Thomas Sowell talks about the firstborn, and he says, this is from, studies. He says of the original Apollo astronauts, 22 of the 29 were firstborn. Very interesting, isn't it? And in classical music, most composers are firstborn. And even members of Congress have been represented overwhelmingly by being firstborn.
Yeah, so, but the firstborn argument really...
it's very interesting, isn't it?
But it's a troublesome argument. I mean, assuming that it's true is just very troublesome because...
he even says firstborns have a higher IQ than twins. Twins don't necessarily have an IQ. That's a flaw with firstborn.
Okay, let me just say a couple of things here to bring this home. Okay, one of which is, if he's not denying actually natural arguments about achievement, okay? If he's arguing naturally in any degree, what makes it interesting and very contentious is the idea that actually maybe certain ethnicities.
Yes, turn it around. I'm listening.
Yeah, certain ethnicities, certain races. I'm not saying this is the case, but someone can make this argument. Certain ethnicities, certain races, certain peoples might have certain intellectual gifts in one way versus certain intellectual gifts for others in another way, right? How does that actually change the argument if that's the case? Let's say that IQ, analytic reasoning, as some people would argue, like, for example, Bernstein and Murray, the bell curve, right?
Right.
That people of Asian descent, for example, tend to be more enjoy gifts of analytical reasoning more than whites and Caucasians and more than people of African descent. It makes it a very troublesome argument, right? All right. Anyway, on one, we don't have to get into that, and it's much too difficult to get into.
Well, he talks about notable achievements involve multiple factors. Like you have to have a desire to succeed. There has to be inspiration.
Yeah.
And as we said,
okay, so we can work out of an argument for saying that actually culture, and that's what I was going to say. So industry, culture, right choices, making, being on the right side of history, morally speaking, having a firm grasp of reality.
Yeah.
Okay. Dare I say, being more scientific in orientation? Okay, in the sense that actually science is about grasping reality the way reality is, not the way you hope it to be or think it is, and so on and so forth. Okay, that may make a difference in all the world. We can actually subsume a lot of that into the question of culture and making choices within the right culture. Okay, and that culture could be a family culture, a community culture, a city culture, a national culture, or a tribal or national culture.
Sure.
Right? It could even be a global culture at some point, like maybe a great movement of the world in the direction of finally casting away certain superstitions and actually grasping reality in the right way and making choices within that proper understanding of reality.
Yeah.
Okay,
and he also says
the funny thing is, so that's a very rightist argument that actually does make a difference. Yeah, let me just finish.
Yeah.
What were you about to say? I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Yeah.
No,
go ahead.
You're making an argument for right or left. I'm just giving you what Sowell discovered in his book. For example, he says some societies or cultures or nations could just arrive on the scene and, come from being a backwater. I brought up Scotland, and he said in the 1850s, because they learned English and they abandoned their Gaelic dialect, they learned, I guess, the language of prosperity, English. They were able to read the Bible, and they produced James Watt, the engineer, Adam Smith, economics, David Hume, Joseph Black, the chemist.
Amazing. Yeah, they call it the Scottish Enlightenment.
Literature. And John Stuart Mill, economics. So he said, how did this happen? They changed one thing. I guess they had the propensity. They were intelligent enough and industrious enough. But how did they do it? They changed one prerequisite, learning the language. And I guess that fostered a scientific approach where they were even surpassing the British in many ways. Yeah. He brings up another point, then I'll let you go. A distinguished economic historian said, despite their vast advantages in literacy and human capital for many centuries, Jews played almost a negligible role.
Negligible.
Yeah, I can't pronounce it. In the history of science and technology before and during the early Industrial Revolution. Okay? You heard no advances from Jews in math and science from 1600 to 1750. There were no names or Jewish names that were involved in this whole fostering of intelligence. So what happened? He said one prerequisite changed. Do you know what that was? They had an opportunity to be admitted into universities in the 19th century.
See, that's a different type of argument.
I know. I'm just giving.
That's an argument that actually
things
that's an argument that people have a certain capacity that's natural. That actually just waiting for that that opportunity within which actually one can actually enjoy the gifts that they have. I got
Isn't that interesting though?
Okay, but the question is actually, now this is actually the more difficult question, and this is probably the hard argument. We shouldn't reach for straw man arguments. We should reach for hard arguments.
No, these aren't straw man arguments. I'm just giving you what Sowell has discovered in his book.
But the hard argument would be the one who might be a critic of actually what seems to be the major thrust of Sowell would be to ask, what does this have to do with the question of fairness? Which is to say, what does this have to do with the question of justice?
Yeah.
That's an argument unto itself. Let me give you an example. If we have two brothers,
yeah,
okay, one of which is born a genius and the other one is born the village idiot. Okay, yeah. Let's see. All right. Why should the genius, simply by dint of birth, I see your stomach, man.
Go ahead.
You pulled that from the ceiling or something? What the?
Go ahead. Why should what?
Why should the genius, okay, enjoy all the benefits, okay, all the goods that come from society, simply because he was born with certain gifts that the other one was not?
Okay,
that's an interesting.
Let
me say, justice theory, that's called the question of desert. What, in fact, do we deserve? Now, I understand that actually if people earn and work for something, if you could tease that out from the gifts that people are given, that are born with, okay? If they earn it, then it actually plays into the principle, okay, the Puritan principle, if you think about it, that those who work harder should actually enjoy the fruits of their own labor. Right?
Sure.
They should enjoy more that which they actually make the right choices for and actually work more towards. Fine. Yeah. I got that part. But at some degree, you're not going to allow the village idiot, okay, to starve to death, even though he doesn't have the goods, naturally speaking, to compete with the genius, right?
Once again, we spoke about this. There are numerous safeguards that help that person.
Okay, I got it. Yeah. But I mean, but it took this type of argument for many decades actually to come to the point where we should actually even, not allow the market to completely dictate, right, the terms, the relations of people, and that actually we should temper the market by actually providing some sort of a baseline
we have
of support to allow. But very interesting in the Rawlsian argument, which is very interesting, that actually as a matter of justice, we should give enough for people to be able to actually enjoy the product of their own choices to begin with.
Yeah, sure, of course.
We actually should give them enough. They're free enough to actually to make their own choices of the good and to enjoy, okay, the choices that they make. Okay, whether actually it turns out not actually being, for example, as financially beneficial as actually other choices that people make. All right, very interesting, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, what do people, but it's a very interesting argument, because what happens then when it comes to countries that seem over the course of history to always have been poor, all right, versus countries that have always been rich? Is there now a moral requirement?
Once again, you're saying always. May I just interject? Yeah. The history of man has been, most countries have been poor. Wealth is a recent phenomenon. It's only been maybe the last 50 or 60 years. I mean, if you look at the numbers, I don't have them, but the world, maybe the last 20 years, has become exponentially richer. For example, China, by adapting capitalist policies, open markets, and doing some things, that we're shaking a stick at, saying they're wrong, stealing intellectual property and other things, has increased their wealth maybe 20 or 30 times from 1970 to now. So they were able to, as Sowell would probably say, to add a prerequisite. Yeah. They already had the prerequisite of a history, education, hard work. Now the prerequisite of adapting free enterprise that has taken them out of poverty to many degrees. Yeah. Or even Japan, as we said, from the 1850s on. I don't know if they had a scientific revolution. We could look that up. Yeah. But something happened that inspired them. You and I both know what made them belligerents in World War II. Not what made them, but what made them comfortable. They had a phenomenal Navy that they learned from the British. They were educated under the British to build a Navy. So they had that prerequisite of saying, we're willing to learn. They also had the intellectual capacity and many other prerequisites that put them over the top. So I just wanted to add one thing in closing. We were talking about the Jews. These numbers are outstanding. So Jews began to flood into universities. By 1880, 30% of all students in Vienna were Jewish. And this happened in France and America and all over the world where discriminatory policies were abolished. So of the population of Jews in Europe and the U.S. in the second half of the 20th century, Jews were less than 1% of the population, but they received 22% of the Nobel Prizes in chemistry, 32% in medicine, and 32% in physics. They already had prerequisites of success, which is literacy.
These are, let me just say, these are numbers.
They only needed to add one prerequisite, was breaking down these barriers of inclusion into the schools.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's my only hope for Puerto Rico at some point, but we'll see, man.
Well, as we know, Chris, our fraternity and those that bought into the American system are competing with the world. Latins, Puerto Ricans, us, who bought into the system are doing exceptionally well. You got to buy into the system. You need the prerequisites, So this is really interesting discussion we had. May I just say one more thing? He even brings up business. He brings up the Kodak company, which in 1994 had sales of $16 billion. Kodak. It was the innovator in film in many ways. All the things that concern with film, Kodak was at the forefront. Today, it filed for bankruptcy a couple years ago. Its sales are now $1 billion. What happened? One prerequisite changed. You know what changed? They didn't invest in SLR cameras, digital cameras. Even though they had the technology, other companies did. SLR cameras were non-existent in the 90s. Now they comprise a phenomenal number of sales where Kodak wasn't able to benefit from that. Now Sony and other companies are dominating in film, and Kodak filed for bankruptcy, and they have, I think, 20,000 employees now as opposed to 150,000 30 years ago. So one prerequisite changed. They didn't invest in this certain field or this certain technology. Even though they had the technology, they invented some sort of thing, that sensor that would make it possible for them to bring out the camera, but they never did. One prerequisite changed, and I think we have to say another prerequisite change: the demand for SLR cameras, right? A demand for something.
Sure.
And history's riddled with numerous clothing companies that missed the trend. Maybe they didn't invest in something, or leather, or this, or this. They were still selling bell bottoms when straight pants were coming out, or vice versa. Very interesting. Very interesting discussion. But I just thought this would be...
It seems to me... It seems to me that actually we seem to be agreeing on one thing, at least. Okay? There are a lot of ways we can look at this, but one thing we seem to be agreeing on, and that is that certain ways are better than other ways. Right?
Oh, yeah. I think those are obvious ways to look.
Well, when it comes to the question of inequality, certain ways are better than other ways. Certain choices are wiser than other choices. And arguably, this is a very difficult one, certain cultures, it's just another way of saying the same thing, are better than other cultures with respect to certain objects. Like, for example, with respect to growing an economy, with respect to seeing justice done within a legal order.
Sure, and stability, respect for law, upward mobility, freedom of speech. That is why the West actually takes in more migrants than any other place. Western countries do. Actually, China has a zero population growth of people coming into China. But America is exploding. Why do people want to come to the West? Why do people want to come to America? Why are refugees, unfortunately, from the Middle East flooding Europe? Why are they not going to other Middle Eastern countries?
I understand that part, but it gets a little bit confusing when you have what's called the persistent minority or the persistent disenfranchised. For example, you can look at that within each nation.
I think this is a very good discussion for next time.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Let me just open it up for next time. And the other thing is the persistent underdevelopment of certain peoples around the world. On one hand, one would say that they don't have the right culture, the right choices, the right institutions that are a reflection of
Correct.
culture, right choices. And the argument on that side would be the level of corruption that one sees, for example, amongst their leaders. That no matter how much money
all part of it, the prerequisites. You have to have them all lined up.
But on the other hand, and actually that also plays into the other argument, which is the other side of the equation, which is that maybe like with an analogy to the Jews, maybe the Puerto Ricans actually, okay, that they have the capacity to live really fulfilled and fulfilling lives, and maybe to even compete, compete in many ways better than the rest of the world, or equally so, but they don't have the right opportunity, just like the question with the Jews. That actually, if you make the global economy, for example, and the global political order fairer and more open to these countries, that they'll be able to compete in a way that, in a way that's fair. Okay.
Oh yeah, and I think
let me just say a wrench in that argument would be that that the capacity to compete is not equally distributed amongst all peoples. It's a very difficult argument to make.
Of course, it's never going to be equal. No, it's never
and that actually. And that actually, no matter how much opportunity that you provide for peoples, it's not going to make a difference. And how much you account for current or past discrimination or unfairness is not going to make a difference if, in fact, underlying all of this is actually a difference of natural endowments. Okay, I'm not willing to make that argument, but hey, we don't know quite what reality is, and that might be part of the matrix of reality. So there you go.
Right. We'll talk about that next time. And this was fantastic. Just skimming the first couple pages of Sowell, and once again, his argument is possibly, and I don't want to speak for him, that there's never been equal results. It's not even possible within families where they grew up under the same roof, ate the same food, have the same genetics. The firstborn has done better, even in Europe, in Norway, than the second and third born, even in going to college in France. So very interesting, to examine these things. And of course, there's a multitude of variables involved as to why. So let's sign off to this. And
I think for the next time, I think one thing we should do is actually we should focus on John Rawls and see what he adds to the mix. It's quite interesting.
We can do that.
And particularly about the question of dessert, the question of not in terms of banana split dessert, not in terms of Hogan, our favorite ice cream place from the Bronx, New York, but dessert in terms of what people deserve from what they don't deserve, notwithstanding what they're born with.
All right, buddy.
We'll talk. All right, cuz, keep well, keep safe, all right? Keep hope alive, all right? The Boogie down.
Bless you.